Okay, let's learn stuff. Declaration of Independence. When did the Second Continental Congress vote to accept the Declaration of Independence? That was July 4th, 1776. That is a good date to remember. July 4th, obviously, but 1776 was the year. Who wrote the Declaration of Independence? There are actually a bunch of folks, and all of these folks, Samuel Adams, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, were part of the American Revolution, but Thomas Jefferson really is the person who wrote the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was a document that told colonists they would never be free from Britain. No, that was not the point. Told the king that they wanted to be part of France. No, they didn't want to learn to speak French, like speaking English. Gave reasons why the King of England should be dethroned. No, they had no particular beef with the king. He just wanted to be left alone. So it gave the reasons why the colonies should be free from Britain. Sort of convinced themselves, too, not just to let the king know. The Declaration of Independence was read from the balcony of the old State House in what city? These are all excellent guesses. New York and Philadelphia were very important back then, but Boston is the correct answer. The Declaration of Independence said that all men, today that would be all people, are created equal. That's the right answer. That sounds good. The wrong ones live by the rules of the king. No, that's what they're fighting against. Created by God. Good to know, but that's kind of religious for a government document. And all men should fight, kind of the implication, but it's really bigger than that, that all men are created equal. Very, very important in the United States. All right, let's go to the second level. How many colonies agreed to accept it? It was all of them. The unlucky number 13, that's the number it was. 13 colonies back then. Who signed the Declaration of Independence first with a very large signature? Well, that's your clue there. John Hancock had this gigantic signature they used on documents. And even though Thomas Jefferson wrote it, John Hancock was the first to sign it. Who did not sign the Declaration of Independence? Well, let's see. Of these, we know John Hancock did. Thomas Jefferson wrote it. Ben Franklin was involved. George Washington became the general, so he was actually not a signer of it. I'm sure he wanted to, but for some reason he wasn't at the right place at the right time. What holiday commemorates the signing of the Declaration of Independence? Well, that is when we blow stuff up with fireworks. That is Independence Day, or July 4th, which the signing happened on July 4th, so not surprising. What is a declaration? A declaration, not private. It's actually meant to be kind of shouted out, so it's not a personal letter either. It's really an announcement that's meant for everyone to read or hear. You're trying to convince a lot of people of something, and it's not a type of invitation. Nice. Second level done. Third level. How many women signed the Declaration of Independence? Well, sadly back then, there were no women who signed it. That would obviously be very different today. How many other men worked on the committee with Thomas Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence? I didn't know this, but there was actually a committee, and there were 4 other people on that committee that helped but Thomas Jefferson wrote the bulk of it. How many total signatures appeared on the Declaration of Independence? Well, these numbers seem kind of small. There were a lot of people involved back then, so right number is 56, which, 50 states, 56 signers, kind of rough ballpark way to remember it. What was the official signing date of the Declaration? So the official signing date actually came a little bit after July 4th, 1776. This one kind of everybody got together. It was about a month later in August of the same year. It's the official signing date, even though they first started signing it on July 4th of 1776. What was in the body of the Declaration? The preamble is usually the beginning part, so it's not the body. Complaining, yeah, that's kind of what they were doing, is letting the king know that they were not happy. The signatures were at the bottom. Bill of Rights actually came later, so it was the complaints. They were just basically saying things are not good, we need to do something. Nice. Level 4. The Declaration of Independence was written before the start of the American Revolution. That would seem like a good guess to kind of kick things off. Certainly it wasn't written after the end. After the start of the American Revolution, it seems strange you'd have the Declaration after the start, but in fact, it did get signed a year or so after the American Revolution started, which was kind of when the British troops marched on Lexington and Concord. Declaration of Independence described Britain's leader as being unfit to be king. Which king did the Declaration of Independence refer to? So that's basically the king who was ruling England at the time of the American Revolution, and his name was George. Just got to know that it was King George. These are all probably other fine kings, but George III was the king in charge at that time. Rumors say that this rang during the first public readings of the Declaration of Independence. Well, if it rang, it must have been a bell, which it is, and the Liberty Bell is the one that is associated with the American Revolution. I think that you can still see that in Philadelphia, and it's still got the crack in it from when it was rung. John Hancock was not the primary author. That was Thomas Jefferson, not the last person. So neither of those are right. A lawyer from Virginia seems kind of not interesting. So president of the Second Continental Congress. So he was probably, if he was president, that might be why he got such a big signature on the Declaration of Independence and the first to sign it. The oldest person to sign the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson was actually a pretty young man when he did it. John Hancock might be a good guess. Maybe he was older. George Washington was going to be a general, so he was probably younger and more fit. Ben Franklin was an old statesman at that time. He'd been around, and Ben Franklin was the oldest person to sign the Declaration of Independence. Very, very important in the American Revolution. The Declaration's important. Last level, here we go. What did the Declaration of Independence state that the people had a right to do if the government became unjust? Get rid of their citizenship, move to another country, sure, but not that interesting. Move to a different country, sure. Get rid of the unjust government, make a new one. So this is pretty radical. They didn't like it. They felt they had a right to create a new one. And that is the right answer. What did the Continental Congress approve that directly preceded the creation of the Declaration of Independence? I don't really know this one. Constitution came much later. Magna Carta came way earlier. Articles of Confederation also, I think, came later, kind of after, the Constitution, Articles of Confederation, after you'd won the war. So I think the right answer is the Lee Resolution. You might check that out, a little more information on it. How did the British government react to the Declaration of Independence? They were probably not happy, but they did not just stop talking to the colonies. They didn't just write. They were kind of mad. They considered it an act of rebellion. There's no way they were going to just accept the colonies' independence. The colonies were very important to their country. Thomas Jefferson was convinced that the Declaration of Independence would force the King of Britain to change his government. That'd be pretty high expectations for a piece of paper, but possible. Didn't think it would actually help the colonies. Well, why would he write it? That can't be true. Would lead other countries to seek freedom and liberty. That's pretty big ask as well. Would be accepted by the American people, but not by anybody else. Well, in fact, he had big plans for it. He really thought that America could set the precedent. So we'd do that. That would be the one to actually influence other countries as well. What was done with the Declaration of Independence as soon as it was approved by all the delegates? Displaying it would be a good idea. If it was approved, it had already been signed. Sending it to the King of Britain would be a good idea. But in fact, the first thing they had to do was let everybody in America know about it. So they made copies of it and handed them out. No Twitter and Instagram back then, so they actually printed them off and handed them to people. And we are done. So great job. You're done? Go learn.